President Trump has turned on Vladimir Putin at last. Well, sort of. So, what do we think of the measures that he has just announced? And how is all this likely to go? Let's discuss. Over the last few days, President Trump has taken to expressing his displeasure over the attitude and the activity of one Vladimir Putin. And he let it be known that today, Monday, he would be making what he described as a major statement on Russia and Ukraine. Bearing in mind that Trump has been known to promise a major event, and then it turned out to be, him launching a tacky Trump trading card or something. So you never quite know what these words mean in the Trumpian dictionary. Trump had already announced that he would permit a shipment of Patriot missiles to go to Ukraine to help Kiev to defend against the incoming missile and drone attacks that they have seen so many of in the last few weeks. He decided to do this apparently immediately after his call with President Putin last week. In the immediate aftermath, he's reported to have told French President Emmanuel Macron he wants all of it being Ukraine. Yes! Fairly sure there have been a significant number of people telling you exactly that. Not least President Zelensky of Ukraine. Indeed, didn't you basically throw President Zelensky out of the White House for telling you exactly that? Now, to be fair, nobody who ever used to be a Fox News host had told him, which is, after all, the criteria for having the president's ear in this strange era that we're living through. But anyway, for now at least, it seems as though he's finally worked it out. The question was, so what was he going to do about it? Republican Senator and Trump supporter Lindsey Graham had said yesterday that the announcement was going to be, quote, very aggressive. Of course, Trump has also worked his way into something of a corner. Having resolutely campaigned against forever wars, generally refusing to send arms to Ukraine, he had trained his base to be pretty much pro-Putin and anti-Ukraine. He's already provoked one MAGA rebellion over the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theory stuff. Could he risk another one? If it was handed to him on a plate, yes. And that answer came from European leaders and President Zelensky, who, once Trump had won the presidential election and it had become clear what this could mean, they were discussing between themselves a way to keep the weapon support going to Ukraine, even if Trump didn't want to be hands-on. And that was to permit the exchange of weapons, but to have them bought and paid for by NATO countries and then forwarded by them to Ukraine. The plan was apparently discussed with Trump at last month's NATO summit, in between all the obsequiousness and discussions of higher defence spending. And it suits Trump down to the ground. It means that America is doing very well out of other people's misery. The US get paid roughly $1 billion for each Patriot missile system. That keeps the America First criteria satisfied. And the hope is that providing Ukraine with a wave of new sophisticated weapons will send a signal to Putin that Trump is serious about ending the war and it's time for him to start negotiating. Unfortunately for Trump, there is no sign that Vladimir Putin takes him remotely seriously. After all, if he was that serious and determined, then he would have given the weapons to Ukraine, not sold them to allies on the basis they would pass them on, because that sort of elaborate theatre is an expression of weakness. Trump having to keep his own supporters on side on the basis of all the nonsense that he's been preaching to them in the past. Putin would have approached this promised announcement by Trump, I expect, with no more than curiosity to see exactly what and how far Trump would actually be able to bring himself to go. I think he will have done so on the assumption that there is little Trump could do that would substantially harm Russia at this stage, heavily sanctioned as it already is. Putin will have been aware, of course, of the Russia sanctions bill waiting for the president's go-ahead in the Senate. Now, in theory, that bill, which would slap crippling tariffs onto the countries that buy Russian oil or gas, would potentially hit Russia pretty hard, because it would likely prompt China and North Korea and other Russia energy customers to drop them like a stone, aiming to avoid basically crippling tariffs of hundreds of % by doing so. But Putin would also be aware that Trump had insisted that he had unfettered discretion within the bill to delay the measures coming in. So he would have expected that Trump would wave the bill around like an angry child waving a stick, but in so doing he would play his usual game, namely announcing a deadline after which the measures would be invoked, and expecting that that deadline would lead the Russians to seek to negotiate on an accelerated timetable in order to beat it. In the event, it seems that Trump didn't want to trust to a process that could potentially draw any sort of limit on his discretion from Congress. So what he actually announced today was that he said he would hit Russia with secondary tariffs at 100%. Now, I assume by secondary tariffs he's referring to the same intent as the Congress bill, but he wasn't explicit, so we need to see that clarified. Tariffs on Russia directly obviously would mean very little at this stage. And the 100% figure is giving is just 1/5 the level in the Congress bill, although to be fair, as he said, it's a high enough level to be pretty crippling already. And the deadline aspect was there as well. He's going to give Putin 50 days before levying these tariffs. 50 days to sign a peace deal. No doubt those 50 days could and likely will be extended. You know, if Putin makes some baby steps in the right direction or says something nice to him or something. How seriously will Putin take this threat? Well, it's not as though Trump's track record of actually imposing tariffs with a deadline and then following through, I don't think it's going to provoke mortal fear in him. I expect he wasn't hugely impressed with an exchange that happened towards the end of today's event, where a reporter asked Trump, if Putin continues to escalate, how far are you prepared to go in response? Trump's answer to that? Don't ask that question, he said. Right. Comes across as not so much strategic ambiguity as basic cluelessness. The truth of all this is that nothing much has changed. Ukraine and Europe had come to the conclusion that the next phase of the survival of Ukraine is in their hands. They faced the prospect of having to navigate serious interference from the White House in doing that, which seemed to be on a pro-Putin agenda. But Putin's disinterest in making concessions in the cause of Trump's dream of a Nobel Peace Prize, that has made that less of an issue now. Now, so long as the US doesn't have to pay for them, they can get weapons, and at least it now makes it likely the Americans will stop doing things like approaching the Ukrainian opposition parties to sound out the possibility of removing President Zelensky from post, a thing that they did, and that we would expect them to do again at the drop of a hat if they felt like it. Apparently right now they don't feel like it, so that's progress of a sort, I guess. If there had been any journalists worth their salt in the event today, somebody surely should have asked President Trump whether he would now apologise to Zelensky for throwing him out the White House when all he had done was seek to get Trump and J.D. Vance to understand what they now apparently seem to understand. Now, it would be asking too much, of course, and probably wouldn't have been seen by NATO head Mark Rutte as being a helpful question to put to the man that just a couple of weeks ago he was calling Daddy. There will now be lots of attention on this because it's really all about Trump making this process about him, but Trump's deadline won't make any substantive difference to Putin. NATO and the Ukrainians are doing the heavy lifting of fighting Russia. Trump will just keep on doing what he was doing today, going on and on about how it was Biden's war, not his, and it would never have happened if he'd been president, blah, 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 blah. All the while demonstrating over and over again that nothing he has in his toolbox, the things he'd assumed would enable him to end the war in one day, none of that matters in the slightest to the genuine strongman leaders of the world, the ones who routinely use violence to achieve political objectives. That's the world he's been flirting with, while frankly not understanding the depths of darkness he was potentially opening up for his country and for the world. Maybe he will start to understand as a result of this. I mean, I doubt it, but maybe.